Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, they get really resentful, right? Because they feel like, how about me? I want to receive, like, I want to feel cherished. I want to feel like you're protecting me and you're providing for me instead of being like what they call the Peter Pan.
Headquarters, and today I'm joined by Antia Boyd from Magnetize Your Man. Antia, nice to have you here.
Hey, Bob, how are you?
Good. So, those that don't know her, I want to tell you a little bit about her. She has probably for the last 10 years coached thousands of women. And one of the ways is because she's all over social media because her content's so good. It's, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. I'm sure I'm leaving out something. But I mean, I've known her, but I've seen her everywhere as well. And her content just draws you in. And I was excited to have her here today because she's talking about an area that I don't hear a lot about. Today, we're going to talk about the 5 male wound patterns and how this affects relationships. And we were talking some ahead of time. So, how about tell us a little bit about you, and then maybe we can just jump right into what you've been studying because I found it interesting.
Yeah, and what an honor and pleasure to be here with you, Bob. And hey, I'm Antia Boyd with Magnetize Your Man, and together with my husband Brody, we've been helping literally thousands of successful women all over the world, all ages, all stages, to get the connected, committed, and long-term relationship that they really desire fast.
And I know that your heart's really into this too. And I know with Brody, your husband, the passion he shares with this. And one of the things I think about when you're talking about this is we talk about the real intimacy and the fun, but also what goes with real intimacy is how someone deals with injuries and how someone's aware of it. And it's not as simple as just, oh, let me make this better. Let me give you something or let me do something nice for you. That you've been talking about from an intimacy and closeness standpoint, really what helps couples connect. And you've identified, I think you said 5 patterns. And the nice thing about that is it takes a lot of the nebulous stuff away. So if you'll share that with us, I haven't even heard them yet. So this is going to be new for me as well. So I'd like to hear just as well as those listening.
Yeah, I'm so excited to share that because, after speaking over, 100 stages all over the world with my husband, like we've never heard anyone share that. And, what I find so often, the reason why I went really deeply into this is because to really think about what's really the crux, like what really helps you to heal your patterns in partnership, right? And so it's not like as simple. It's not as simple as saying, oh, they have this attachment style. And if you just fix that really quick, it's too simple, right? Like I always believed after studying personality psychology at UC Berkeley that, our personalities are a little bit more complex than that. And so I came across the wound patterns when I was studying developmental psychology. So what I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to dive right in about all 5. So you want to have a grab pen and paper right now. You want to write them down and then we can kind of talk a little bit about it. And also the listener too. I love it. So the first pattern that we're going to be talking about today is the avoidant. And of course, you could say, oh, I've heard that before. Isn't that like the dismissive avoidant attachment style? Yeah, that could be potentially part of it. But when we really talk about the developmental stages, we're really talking about sort of the first 1.5 years of life about. And what that means is when the man, and of course, you may not know that right away when you're dating him. So this is just for you to be compassionate. But if the man had an upbringing where he didn't feel safe in his body, maybe something went wrong with the birth, right? Maybe maybe he's an orphan. Like I've seen that avoidant pattern with orphans, which of course makes perfect sense because the theme for them is terror, right? And of course, can you imagine your parent comes out of the womb and off you go to somewhere, a cold bed, you're dropped off on a planet, you know what I mean? And you're like, I don't know who I am, what I am, who belongs to me or anything. So of course, it's absolutely terrifying. And so because humans are smart, what we do in order to survive, we develop what's called coping mechanisms, okay? And so this particular type says, okay, you know what? It's so painful to be in my body. Let me just leave. So those people love to be with God or with their angels. They're very spiritually advanced usually. But you know why? Is because they're using it as a bypass, right? So instead of actually feeling their feelings, they disassociate. And so how you may notice that, those would be for sure the ghosters. Like if you've come across someone who ghosts, also someone where you feel like they're not really present. They're sitting next to you, but like you feel like, are you in your body? Are you here? Are you, what's going on? Right. And oftentimes you can even, now it's not always true, but in general, you can identify them because they tend to be on the leaner side. And that makes, of course, sense because think about it. If I'm always out of my body, then the last thing I'm going to do is eat or work out or anything that makes me focus on my body. Makes sense? So that's type number 1. Bob, if you have any questions, I'm going to go deeper into anything, but I just want to make sure we get through all 5 to give you all the value here. And so the second type is the connector. Okay, so this particular type got sort of like stalled in the second developmental stage where it was all about getting your needs met, right? So you're getting breastfed or you were crying in the middle of the night. Did your mom, your dad come, right? Were you hugged? Did you get the affection? Or were you told, you're too much or, you know, and they weren't there for you. You were sleep trained. I know I always get a lot of heat for that, but I'm going to stand by that sleep training does have an impact on the nervous system, on the developmental stages. And so in any case, if you come across someone like that, they love to just melt into you, right? They give like the longest hugs where you feel like, wait, this guy gives like longer hugs than me. And they feel very soft. They feel very like squishy. They're like almost like a little teddy bear. And the problem with those guys is they have a really hard time with polarity. You know what I mean? So also if a man is watching that right now, my heart goes out to you.
What do you mean by polarity?
Like the men being in their masculine, for me particular, the women being in their feminine, because the women that come to me when the man who's in his masculine, the qualities that they describe as a man is masculine. And so what happens is that this particular type feels more like a little boy, right? So he loves to be in his little boy energy. And that, of course, like long-term would build resentment for women because she would feel like she has to be the mommy and she has to lead and she has to plan and she has to initiate. And so if you notice that to be true about the man that you're dating, like that could be behind that, right? So that's something where he could do like some healing around that as well. I would say the worst thing that you can do is actually meet all of his needs because you're going to create codependence.
And the woman would get really resentful too.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, they get really resentful, right? Because they feel like, how about me? I want to receive, like I want to feel cherished. I want to feel like you're protecting me and you're providing for me instead of being like what they call the Peter Pan, not so attractive. You know what I mean? Lots of fun, but there's a little bit more to life than just fun, right? There's purpose, there's growth, there's many different qualities. Anyway, so type number 3 is the passive guy. So this is the guy that you may text and call and he's happy to talk, right? And you're like, wait, then why doesn't he call me? Like, why doesn't he text me, right? And the reality is there is a chance that he got arrested in the 3rd developmental stage, okay? And so the 3rd developmental stage is all about boundaries. It's all about like really seeing, okay, so I had this great idea. So maybe he wanted to get a cookie from the cookie jar, I always joke. And so maybe he got caught and then he got shamed. And then he decided, I'm not going to take action again because when I took action last time, it didn't go so well. And if it's a man, shaming him is even worse. So he said, I tell you what, unless I get spoken permission, literally, like somebody is like initiating and then I respond, I'm just not going to do it. And what's sad about that is that those are usually guys who have tremendous potential and capacity. They can even be in the C-level executives. But what I've seen with that, Bob, is that there's still like this hiding going on. And I'm like, what are you doing? You're like absolute genius. You're brilliant. Why do I always need to call on you? Like, why do I always need to? And I was like, oh, that's why, right? Because they actually like say, let me hide in the earth. They're the opposite of the avoidant, by the way. They're like very grounded, very in their body, too much in their body. They don't move. That's the slowest type. So that's how you can identify passive one too, is they speak slower. They move slower. They usually also tend to have more weight, sort of like waist down, which makes sense, right? Because they're pressing all the energy downward. I'm hiding in the earth like a tree. Like, right? But I always joke that the tree stem is also under the earth for for a passive one.
It's below the surface, you can't see it, but below the surface, there's a lot underneath there. And so it doesn't
Lot.
look like much at the surface, but if you were to dig down, it goes much deeper than what you see.
100%, and incredible people. And by the way, I work with women, right? Of course, women have those patterns too, and in a feminine way. And when we identify them for women, I'd like one woman, she's now engaged and they moved in together, right? Because we were able to identify this pattern and break through her fear of being like visible and just speaking up. And then even at her company, about because of course it becomes a ripple effect for other areas in
Mhm.
your life, right? Like out of the sudden, she was asked to like lead and train on how she knows all of this stuff because she became more visible. And it felt still scary to her, of course, because it's the passive one will always be a little scared to.
Isn't that one of the signs of growth, though, is that someone can do something even while they are scared or even while
Yes.
they don't feel confident versus I must wait until I feel a certain thing before I take action, go on a date,
Mm-hmm.
take a risk, confront
Mm-hmm.
someone. And I think what I'm hearing you say is that no, actually, she was able to feel it once she tapped in, once she was aware. Those feelings, she could feel them and they didn't dominate her anymore. She didn't do whatever it took to bury them.
Yep. Yep. That's what she literally said in the exit interview on my podcast is that she said that's one of the things that she learned right before she met her man, to break through that fear and to stay, to not go back into the
Hmm.
and sort of like into like the little hole. I think about the little animals in the woods, that are like saying, let me just into the ground,
I'm pausing
you
with you
know.
for a second just to emphasize how powerful because
Uh-huh.
that's so different than typically what we hear of power through stuff, be strong, be confident, and there's a place for that. Absolutely, there's a place for that.
Right.
But this is more well-rounded. I'm hearing you talking about the willingness to go to these places and the
Mm-hmm.
freedom this leads, even though it doesn't feel like it all the time. Even though it
Mm-hmm.
feels, which is to me one of the main reasons for having a coach, whether it's business, relationship, whatever, because what feels good, I'm sorry, what feels bad, right, and bad, wrong feel the same. They both feel weird. They both feel uncomfortable. I don't know if I'm doing the right stuff or not. And someone say, "Yep, you're on the right track." But when I've hired coaches, that makes all the difference in the world. No, no, keep doing that. Okay, because it doesn't feel like it's working. And so I mean, I'm sure you do that. We do that with clients all the time.
Yep, 100%. One thing that I tell my clients is like, just imagine you have all those myelin sheaths around your neurons that decided what patterns you run over and over again, but that have become a habit. So if you remove the myelin sheath, the old ones, and put new ones on, of course, it's going to feel super deregulating and uncomfortable because it's nothing you've ever experienced before, and it feels very sort of like out of sorts, right? It's kind of like when you go to a chiropractic adjustment and you come out and all of a sudden you feel like, I feel a little off. No, now you're actually adjusted. But you were off your
Mhm,
whole life. I don't know if you
mhm.
can relate to that, Bob.
Well, when I was a therapist before I did into coaching, I remember learning about the power of familiar.
Hmm.
And with families, you get families in there, and Johnny was, trouble, and all of a sudden Johnny would get better, but the whole family would start falling apart. I saw that time and again because what was familiar was Johnny was the cause of everyone's problems. Johnny was the cause, and I've seen that before with people back. Just what you stuff seen. They straighten their back up. Oh, this hurts. No, 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 you're straight now. No, no, this doesn't feel. And people will fight at times to keep familiar because it's uncomfortable. And I go back to the story you told with the woman. I could just vision her of just this doesn't feel normal. Like, right. If it felt normal, you're just doing the same old stuff. We don't expect it to feel normal. And the physiology that goes into that as well.
And of course, if your system is hormonally and chemically used to being in sort of fight or flight, so there's like spikes and excitement and nerve and all the things, and all of a sudden it's just calm. It's gonna feel. I mean, I felt like that when I met my husband Brody. Right, it was just like a calm lake. It wasn't like the spikes and the fireworks and the oh my gosh, I met my soulmate. You know what I mean? The angels are singing.
Is he
It
in the
wasn't
room?
like that, which was a very good thing.
When you say that, I think of normalizing that feeling where it doesn't spike as much because I find a lot of women, I mean men too, but a lot of women is that they're used to the fight or flight, the ones that are, and what they hate is bored. And they associate anything that isn't fight or flight with it's boring. He's boring. Someone in our Facebook group just commented on this. I went on one date. I didn't feel this intense chemistry. Should I let him know? And I bit my tongue. Part of me wanted to say, "Oh my gosh, give him." I didn't. I didn't say that. But someone else in the group said maybe you should give him a chance. I'm like, oh, so good. So I didn't have to say it because you can tell she was real fight or flight oriented, like you're talking about, and she'll do anything to avoid feeling bored.
And it's very irrational, right? Like
Mhm.
one woman that I talked to, she always goes for cheaters because she doesn't want, quote unquote, watch the paint dry on the wall. And so she feels like only cheaters can provide that whatever variety or whatever cocktail she wants to call that of chemicals that are
Mhm.
happening inside of her
I
body.
like
Like,
I
well,
like
that's not,
cocktail. That's a good way to put it. I like cocktail.
yeah, it's a chemical cocktail. And, and she's literally saying, like, I'd rather be disrespected than be bored. Short term, by the way, this is just short term.
Oh
This is
yes,
just while
I
you're recalibrating your emotional guidance system.
I
This
have.
will stop. You will get built the excitement. You will build the attraction. I promise. I'm super attracted to my husband, but it wasn't like this dysfunctional attraction. That's not healthy. That reminds you that you're about to attract the same pattern, the same abuse, the same dysfunction that you experienced in childhood again. It's
And
really that simple,
as
right?
you're saying this with the 5 wound patterns, what I find interesting is, as we're talking about this, I can see how the women would have to face some uncomfortable things to be able to help him with his wound patterns. I mean, it's not like you said, she's not his mom, she's not in charge, she's not his therapist, yes, she's not that. But how it would require something of her too. And I think what you mentioned, like with Brody, is I didn't know you then, but you were at the place then, the realizing, hey, I can have crazy intents. Dated that before, been there, and that usually ends up just awful. What I tell clients is I say, go to the prom with that guy. You go to your high school prom. Just go to the prom. Doesn't matter. He'll never be your father, a father of your kids. Just go to the prom, have fun. Don't marry him. Please don't. Please don't even date him. But if you got to get out of your system, most laugh, but there's some that will cling to it like, no, I'm going to marry that guy. Okay. Just because anything's better than being bored. They'd rather deal with a guy's injuries than
Yeah.
face uncomfortable feelings if they're not careful.
And, you don't know how good it gets, if you're not willing to actually see, well, maybe I have wound patterns, which is my hope too,
Mm.
that same like how I discovered, well, maybe I have wound patterns and that's why I haven't attracted the right one yet. So I'm actually happy that I didn't say yes while I was in my wound patterns because I would have just built a super unhealthy dysfunction with another wound pattern and we would have just been reactive towards each other. A good thing that I learned about it and just, okay, let me just wait until I actually have what I call compatible wound pattern partner
Mm.
for myself, right? Because people always say, well, you guys have been married now for 10 years, you have a baby, all the things. We also went through a miscarriage last year. So we went through a lot. Like people
Mm.
can't just say, well, you guys have just been married for 10 years or something. And we're like, we
As though
never
that's
had really,
magical. It's just 10 years, so there's no problems.
there's like, well, it's flow, right? It's
Mm.
flow. And there's no huge like explosive arguments or fights or anything like that, right? And it's like, well, that's by design, that's because we have compatible wound patterns. And that's when people start to become like interested in like, what does that mean? Like maybe I can attract someone who is compatible wound patterns. And because they thought, oh, I have to find somebody who has no wounds. Well, good luck with that.
Mm.
That's like never going to happen. You're probably going to meet a narcissist who pretends he has no wounds. And it's a whole disaster on the back end a couple months later.
No, that's a great insight, and I don't hear a lot of people talking about. It's about finding a complementary wound pattern type, and I haven't heard that phraseology before, but I've heard that in different ways from a similar pathology. There's different ways, but I love the way you're talking because a wound I can see, and then I don't have to have it all perfect because if it's someone else perfect, narcissistic, then I have to keep up that image too to be on the same level. And that
100%.
encourages. I told women this. I'm like, you can marry this guy. Don't gain 5 pounds. Don't ever get sick. When you're in a good mood, it's great. But you have a bad day, he'll have no patience for you because he's fragile inside. And
100%.
and the, and when you're talking about this, we didn't discuss this, but I'm wondering if you've seen. I've found that it's not so much someone's issue. I mean, within reason. I mean, if they're sociopath, that's different. But it's more of their awareness and what they do with it. Tell me how that impacts with the wound types, because I heard you say that, look, everybody's got one, or at least there's some level of it.
Yeah.
How does it impact someone's awareness, especially a man? A man's, whether he talks psychology or not? How do you tell them as far as how that impacts on how they should evaluate him?
Oh, so like if they were to say, oh, I resonated, I'm type 3 or I'm the passive one or whatever, now where they should go with that?
Yeah, let me tighten the question. So I use one like with alcoholics. There's no woman on her wish list that says I want to marry an alcoholic. But I've said, if there's a guy that's an alcoholic and he's aware of it, maybe he's going to meetings, but he's been sober for a while and he gets it. He can't play without alcohol. I say, we can work with that. Oh, yeah, we can work with that. But give me someone that says that raise their voice and they say, yeah, you says you have a temper. What temper? That's the one that scares me. It's the
Yeah.
total lack of, and so when you talk about wound patterns, that brought that to mind.
100%. And, with every reactive pattern, right? And this is interesting because I have a client right now who deals with that too. And we're really uncovering, well, what is an alcoholic all about, right? So we're really seeing, well, they're about hiding. There's a lot of shame. So when they encounter shame, they have a certain way how they deal with that shame, which is usually not good. It's like more withdrawing. That's why they're also more like the avoidant attachment style and so on. Um, but it's about, first of all, gaining the awareness, taking the responsibility. And I think that's why in AA they say, and I know we didn't plan to talk about that, but they say like, hey, I'm so-and-so, I'm an alcoholic, right? And the idea is like to actually like take responsibility, because then now you're accountable. You
Mhm.
can't just disappear. You can't just say, well, I don't know. I don't know what happened. Some other version of me overcame me, things like that. And so from me personally, like it's really like developing strategies, right? So first of all, saying, well, how can I um, delay the fractionary reaction time, right? Which means like the time between you feel the reaction and expressing it. Like, can you create more and more space in between? Because if you can create more and more space in between, that's when the strategies come in, meaning like screaming into a pillow,
Mhm.
punching it, or crying your eyes out. If you're more the connector, you're probably more on the softer side, easily collapsing. That's always been like really hard for me. And which makes sense if you were to know about my upbringing, had a narcissistic mom and so on, right? And if you're listening to this or watching this, you may resonate with that. But it's really like saying, you know what, I'm responsible, right? Like if when Brody told me, hey, it's not okay. You're right. So instead of like coming up with what Brene Brown calls the shame shields, right? To be like, well, how about you? Like you didn't put the dishes in the sink, or do you think you're Mr. Perfect? So I could like just go into total attack and reaction, right? But like I know, right? So and this is like where you have to be honest with yourself and say, it's true. Like it wasn't respectful. Now,
And
do I do this all the time? I would say 90% of the time. So you can give yourself a little wiggle room. We're not perfect. We can't be aware of ourselves 24/7,
well,
7
because
days
I
a
think
week.
we don't be authentic, but I want to do something for those that were watching. If you saw the look on Antia's face when you did that, she was playing around, but that when she's being defensive, and if I'm a man watching this, I'm talking to women, I'm like, see, that doesn't come across as intimidating. That comes across as fragile when a woman does that. It's real strong because as a man, I've got more testosterone. You're not really intimidating. You're not bigger than me. I can tell you're upset. And that's when guys will check out because they can't fight. There's not much. And see, that's what if she was going behind her wound patterns like that, then that he doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know that maybe she wants her to pull her close, or because it looks like it's competitive. And so I don't think anyone's necessarily going to remember that in the moment, but I love how you simplified that to how can I delay this? If I'm doing
Yeah.
psychoanalytic, it's that builds ego strength.
Yeah.
And
100%.
that's a wonderful tools that what you gave us is to simple, pragmatic ways that, oh, I don't have to have it all figured out. I can just practice these things and I don't change who I am. I'm still Antia, but I can just
100%.
work on this underdeveloped muscle.
Bob, one distinction that you made a few years for me that I thought was so groundbreaking was really that men don't care like how women feel. It's just about that the women express how they feel, so that it's actually the worst to hide how they feel, because now the man is wondering, well, why is she hiding? I mean, should I question her feeling? Is there something wrong with her feeling? But that men are actually not wired to question her feeling the way she questions her feeling and her validity, right? So I love that you said that. And I mean, one example what I did with Brody was I remember one day we were like, I mean, 1 year newlyweds, 1 year about, yeah. And I was like rageful, you know what I mean? I want to leave the house, slam the door. But then I was like at the door and I was like, I kind of don't want to do that again. And that's the other piece too. You kind of get sick and tired of being sick and tired. And so I'm like, well, so I turned around and I slowly walked towards him, Bob. And my brain was like, are you nuts? We need to protect ourselves. We need to punish him. We need to immediately separate. You need to establish your individuality and show him who's boss and all the things, right? And I just like kept slowly walking towards him and I didn't say anything, just gave him a hug. And then I finally cried, you know? And, but my brain was so scared of that because my mom would use that against me, right? So like if I allowed myself to soften, like she would like hook in as a good narcissist would do, and then guilt trip me. You know what I mean? And so, but so that would be an example of like you can do things differently. And I had to do it very slowly. I didn't run into his arms. I didn't jump, you know what I mean, into his arms. I just
So
walked towards him.
for those watching, and those aren't, I'm going to describe this because I could see it. Auntie is telling a story. It's a memory, but even as she tells it, her eyes look different. You can tell the feeling in it. It's authentic. That authentic is what we're trying to get every woman to express. And it's not about being transparent where you just share everything. So even when she told the story, she's not telling all the details. I mean, there's boundaries here. There's just enough to know, but it fits. It perfectly fits. And we didn't script this, so that's why I didn't want to waste this moment. Is that if you're watching this, you can see it, but it doesn't feel that way for her. It doesn't feel all empowering. It feels vulnerable. But it feels authentic in the moment. That's the thing when you're willing to face wounds that comes across, and it's counterintuitive. I'm just picturing that, choosing to walk toward him in spite of everything, every defense mechanism, just grabbing and pulling, the back part of your brain jerking, just what do you over here? And that courage to walk toward love.
Mm-hmm.
That's I haven't heard anyone describe the way you just did, but that's a great word picture. I mean, I can see that just as clear as if I'm watching it right now. So thanks for sharing that with us. That was very vulnerable and authentic, and that was a great example, which is one reason I like talking with her so much. It's
Oh.
because with her, what you see is what you get.
Hmm.
And so all those people on stage and stuff, it works because she lives it. Not perfect.
Not
If it was
perfect.
perfect, we wouldn't get along. We this would have been a 5-minute interview. Thanks.
Right?
And notice how authentic it is. So I didn't mean to want to stop you with that, but I just thought
Yeah.
that was
So
so
the other
poignant
piece
the
I
way you
wanted to
described.
say, oh, go ahead, Bob.
That's good.
Is so the reason why that's possible, why that was possible, because you may be sitting in your own living room right now, listening to this, or driving your car right now, listening to this, and you're like, I could never do that, right? Like, and that may be because you don't have a complementary wound partner. Now, if Brody would have pushed me, like, don't leave or don't do this, and he created like more resistance, which he never did, right? So then I would have pushed against it because that's what my mom did, right? So he intuitively knew not to do that. And that's why I had enough space to really decide, like, what do I feel is really the aligned, embodied thing to do, that I actually really feel like that's what I want, And the other piece also was for me, I was single my whole life. So I said, Antje, like just 2 years ago, you would have given anything to have a problem like this right now. What are you doing? You are praying for your soulmate. You're dating all these guys, crying your eyes out, filling diary books, you know what I mean, of the lists and the gratitudes and all the things, right? And here you are with your man, and you just want to slam the door on him. So this is also something that we forget sometimes. It's like, hello, like this is literally what you prayed for, and now, okay, fine, you didn't put the dishes in the sink, or you held you accountable to something. You know how it is, right? But I'm gonna just kind of carry on quickly with the two other types, and then we can potentially, because I can feel the women are like sitting on the edge of their seat and be like, "Oh, what's the other two types?" You know what I mean? Especially the ones that love completion. I know some of you love process, and some of you love completion.
Yes,
So
we
the
will
other
complete
two,
it.
right? But that's why you're still listening, because you're still waiting, right? So the number 4 is the leader. And the leader is very fiery. You know when you come across a leader, because they're very loud, they could be the center of attention at parties, and they have a lot of charisma. And they're really sort of influencing people. They can enroll people. They have no problems with that. They take up a lot of space. So sometimes, like somebody who's more like a connector or like an avoidant can actually be triggered by a leader, which makes sense, right? Because the leader is like taking up all the space that all the other ones give them. And happily, they're not apologetic at all. And here's why. Because they learned that they could be stabbed in the back at any moment. So it could be, for example, right, that they got, their parents had them do some things that they could film that was funny, right? But it was actually not funny. It was actually like almost like semi-torturing babies. I hate those like funny baby videos, Bob. I hate them because if I actually track the nervous system of the baby, the parents are like, oh, that's so funny. The baby fell over. Like, that's not funny. You know what I mean? Or inflicting some sort of pain or, that the baby's entertaining for them because you know what?
At the baby's expense.
It breaks trust. And you know what the leader says? I don't trust anyone. You know what I mean? As a matter of fact, I expect anyone at any time to do that. So I'm not gonna be vulnerable, right? Like I'm gonna overrule everyone. As a matter of fact, I'm gonna do that. I'm gonna overpower everyone. Okay. And so like really understanding like why did that happen? It doesn't mean that the leader doesn't have a vulnerable part, but those are the ones that are usually really buff, of course. They're focusing a lot on physical strength because, of course, they're ready to go to war. They're ready to go to battle at any time, street fights or whatever it is, or maybe they're in a boxing club or whatever, but they usually tend to be more on the like broader, bigger side. And it's also like sort of, if you think about from an evolutionary standpoint, right? So like pumping up the chest, right? Like, don't mess with me. I'm the alpha here in the room. And so, sometimes the connector loves that energy. You know what I mean? Because like the connector can be like very feminine if it's a woman. Sorry. and the leader is the masculine. But yeah, in any case, it can also lead to abuse. So if we talk about the wound, unfortunately, leader is the most likely to become abusive, which of course makes sense, right? Because he's like, before someone overpowers me, I'll beat them up, or I, emotionally control them. It's all about control and power for the fourth type. So just something to be aware of. So they're the easiest to identify, of course. Like there's not much more I need to say about that. We all know someone like that. Oh my gosh, that's that person in my office. She's like a total bitch. You know what I mean? I'm like, yeah, probably a leader. And any question you have about that, Bob, before we move on?
No, I think that one's pretty self-explanatory.
Self-explanatory, right? And they don't even have respect usually even for their parents. Or they saw that the dad was like abusing the mom, and so then they're also disrespectful towards the mom, things like that, right? And then type number 5 is the perfectionist. That's the one who just everything needs to be right. You know what I mean? They're in their head all the time because they don't follow their heart, they don't follow their body, they follow systems. Okay, so they follow like rules, regulations. So they love books like the rules, what to say, or call them after 3 dates. They also love to see, okay, so I'm most likely to get pregnant between the age of this and that, or they love statistics. So everything that sort of gets them away from themselves. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? And they tend to be also on the leaner side, but they have like muscle, but they have like more lean muscle, right? So they're very, very strong, but they're also focusing on like really, they're very judgmental. They can be very judgmental because they're judging everyone else for not being perfect or for not following the rules, right? So they will not, flip a bitch. I call it in traffic, right? If you're not allowed to do that, or they will not cross a line and try or whatever it is, right? They will never interrupt someone, all the things, but they could become a little passive aggressive because where do they go if they have to be perfect all the time? Well, they got to go somewhere, and so they can become condescending. They can make like little stabby side comments. And it's really like a metal sword, sort of like when they say something, it hits. It's really jarring on other people.
Would you say they're very measured?
they're very measured, and they're very critical. They usually, when you talk to them, they always have like some critical, well, I wouldn't do it like that.
Mm.
Or they would, they always feel like they need to put some sort of evaluation on what you said, right? And you feel like I just shared. Like I didn't want you to give me feedback. I didn't want you to tell me, you know what I mean? That's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. And the sad part is, right, when I do exercise with them about connecting with themselves, them like, who? Like yourself, like, you know what I mean? Like they don't even know themselves. Like there's nothing inside because everything is projected to the external, right? Now you wonder, wait, how did a perfectionist come to be? Well, they were forced to grow up fast, right? So either they grew up in households where when they dressed in a funny way, which is totally normal. Kids dress up in all kinds of ways. They don't match their socks, all these things. You have a 20-year-old and you've gone through that too, Bob, when she was younger. And so they would get harsh criticisms for that, potentially even punished for that, right? So they always had to match everything. They had to be properly sitting at the table, right? Like everything had to be, they usually also be more, everything is on schedule. So there's nothing about like, oh, the baby doesn't want to eat right now, or the toddler or the whatever, kindergartner, right? Doesn't matter. Like it's 12 p.m., we're eating now, right? Or it's Sunday,
I
10 a.m.
control my internal based on the external world being in control, which
Yep.
would mean I
Yep.
would do that with a partner as well.
100%,
How dare you
right?
gain weight? How dare you fill in the blank? How dare you raise your voice? How dare you get mad and walk out on me? I can't believe you would be so I can imagine someone doing that.
And I think the disconnection there could also happen. They cause just a lot of shame in people, right? Because they catch you when you don't. Nobody's ever on top of everything unless you're a perfectionist yourself. You
Well,
know what I mean? So
is it
maybe the
true? I would
makeup is not
assume they
completely
carry a lot of
perfect.
shame also is one reason why they do that.
Of course, because
But
their shame is their inner child, right? Like as soon as somebody is like, oh, I would never be that emotional, like yuck, right? So this would be more like a perfectionist, somebody who's really judgmental of so they would be highly judgmental of somebody like a connector, right? Because no, I'm not, they literally tell me I don't have emotions, like I'm not that kind of person. Oh really? Like should we rewind the tape and look at all babies across the world and
Mhm,
like show me like which baby, no matter what culture, doesn't
mhm.
have emotions, right? So they're literally like denying, their joy, their feminine, right? The pleasure, the flow, all of that, they're denying all of that to themselves. So that of course has to come out somewhere, and it's usually through projecting, and it's and through shaming all the people who are not acting appropriately or dancing in a certain way, or I mean it could be any kinds of things, right? Who are 5 minutes late to work, she will be the one who will be like telling on them, or at least like making little side comments in the lunchroom and things like that, right? So I can already see some women like, oh my gosh, I know what you're talking about. I mean, that's my mom or that's my sister. And so, but again, the reason why I talk about the 5 types is develop compassion, so that you actually know, like, wow, now I know. But we're all scared to get, what I mean, to get attacked and to get disappointed and to get hurt and to get let down. And so we all just have different ways to put a mask on so that we can deal with that. And then if it gets even quote unquote worse, it becomes a strength. So now they say, well, in business, it has got me really far. I'm running 3 companies. I'm owning 4 homes. I have 3 private jets. You know what I mean? It's a little exaggerated, but, just really just sort of like, it's got me places. So what do you talk about? So when you heal your wound, it doesn't mean that your drive is going to go away. What changes is the motivation. So what that means is now you don't come from a must. Imagine you're like, I have to be perfect, even though I'm completely exhausted and I have no time to get it 2 hours early to do my perfect makeup and hair, right? It's different than I choose. Now it becomes a choice. You're still gonna live, you're still gonna be loved, you're still safe when you're not perfect that day. But now you choose. See how that feels different to the nervous system? Like, so it comes from a
I
parasympathetic
love that
nervous
because when I think
system.
of people that have gone through trauma or wars, one of the things at least I've read from them is the lack of choice. I mean, it's one thing if I have a bad day and there's a choice I can make to get out of it and I tough it out. It's another thing when I don't have a choice, which is what
Yeah.
I'm hearing you say. Then that's the powerless, terrifying part of I don't know how long this is going to last. I don't know what this would. I hear you talking about not being at the mercy of that anymore.
100%. And when you're in fight or flight, research shows you delete 60% of conversations, you delete, you distort, you generalize, and it's just your whole life becomes so complicated. And you may be listening to this because you're not in the right relationship. Maybe you're not in a relationship at all because you can't keep anything. Everyone is running for the hills, or you're running for the hills, and you're like, why am I doing this? Like, I don't want to do this. All I want is to have this deep, connected, committed, authentic, intimate relationship, right? But then I act like all like aloof, and I could care less when I meet a guy, but I only care about that when it's too late and when he leaves. So to really identify, like, well, maybe some avoidance in there, you know what I mean? And some other parts, that you want to look at. What are you judging inside of yourself? Because I would say, people ask me a lot on interviews, what was sort of your breakthrough? And I definitely would say sort of my relationship to the pieces I judged inside of myself, that I don't judge them anymore, that I just show up anyways. And it may be totally weird. One time I told my husband that my ego was thinking about manipulating him. And he said, oh, really? How did your ego wanted to do that? Right? So you'll say things that I'm sure your man has never heard before, or if men are listening right now that your woman has never heard before. You know what I mean? But it'll be so refreshing because it's exactly what you said, Bob. They can feel the authentic heart. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It doesn't matter the appearance, especially for your lovely perfectionists out there. I'm a little bit in that sort of camp too, a little bit. And but do it anyways. Like, do it anyways.
It is
Because
hard
like you
to
can.
emphasize for every woman watching, and I'm speaking for all the men, how hypnotic it is when a woman's authentic. And what I like what you had said, because what you just did was gave us the stuff, the wounded types leads to being transparent or ultra guarded, the extreme, but that authentic is that sweet spot. So before we wrap up, this is fascinating, by the way. I love,
I
I love,
love
I
it.
love talking about this stuff. It brings me back to grad school.
Yes.
I miss being able to talk about this. Is because you work with this. So it's one thing to have this information, you work with it. We're going to put a link down there, links to tell us about. So look, whether you're watching on YouTube or the podcast, it'll blow. But just tell everybody how they can get a hold of you. Highly recommend anyone if this has interested you. See Antia. She doesn't just read stuff; she works with it. She lives it, and she loves this. And there's something about being with someone that loves what they do. That's the people I want to work with, whether it's my attorney, a coach, whatever it is. And she's that. So tell them what's the best way for them to get a hold of you.
Yeah. So next, like, take our free love quiz and virtual coaching session to really get that sort of committed, authentic, transparent, long-term relationship that you desire fast, right? Without the frustration or the endless loneliness that I went through, or maybe in the boat of attracting one emotionally unavailable man after the other. So for that, hop on. It's probably like some in your show notes here to getlovequiz.com, and then you'll be able to potentially get a call with me, have a conversation, but at least take the quiz and see if we for sure have some resources for you there.
Thank you so much for joining us. We will certainly have the links below, but in case someone was driving, I wanted them to hear it, to have some idea, to know that there was a way to reach you. And love to have you back again. I'd forgotten how much fun we had last time until we did this again. Great topic. As always, if you like this, be sure and subscribe and hit the like button. It's on YouTube. Antia, thank you again for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you so much for having me, Bob. Take care.